The wheelchair spun gracefully across the restaurant floor, as 12-year-old Marcus Henderson guided it with trembling but determined hands, his cerebral palsy making each movement a triumph of will over limitation. Beside him, Keisha Williams moved with fluid grace, her black uniform swaying as she matched his rhythm, letting him lead despite his unsteady pace. Richard Henderson froze mid-conversation with his business associates, his champagne glass suspended halfway to his lips. In 37 years of marriage, 25 years of building a tech empire, and 12 years of being Marcus's father, he had never seen his son smile like this. The boy's face radiated pure joy as Keisha bent down, whispering encouragement while following his lead in what could barely be called dancing, but felt like magic. "Sir, about the merger documents," his lawyer began, but Richard held up a hand, unable to tear his eyes away from the scene unfolding 20 feet from their private booth. The other diners had stopped eating. Some pulled out phones, but not to mock, to capture something beautiful. An elderly couple smiled tearfully. A young mother lifted her toddler to see better. Even the hardened waitstaff had paused their duties to watch. Marcus had been born 3 months premature, his tiny body fighting for every breath in the NICU while Richard paced hospital corridors, making calls about stock options and quarterly reports. When the doctors explained the extent of the brain damage, Richard had thrown himself deeper into work, leaving the caregiving to nannies and therapists, while he built Henderson Technologies into a billion-dollar empire. Now, watching his son's face light up as Keisha applauded his awkward but heartfelt movements, Richard felt something crack inside his chest. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow, at the same time, we'll bring you another story of Black people leading the way that you won't want to miss. "Who is that waitress?" Richard whispered to the maitre d', who had approached their table with obvious nervousness. "That's Keisha Williams, sir. She's worked here for 3 years. Please don't be upset. I'll speak to her immediately about maintaining professional." "Don't you dare interrupt them." Richard's voice carried a warning that made the maitre d' step back. Something was happening here that Richard didn't understand. But he knew with the instinct that had built his fortune that this moment would change everything. The dance ended with Marcus clapping his hands in delight, his speech slurred but unmistakably happy as he thanked Keisha. She knelt beside his wheelchair, adjusting his napkin with the gentle care of someone who understood fragility, before wheeling him back toward Richard's table with steady, confident steps. "Daddy, did you see me dance?" Marcus's excitement made his words tumble together, but Richard heard every syllable clearly for perhaps the first time in months. "I saw, son. You were incredible." The words felt foreign in Richard's mouth. When had he last praised Marcus for something other than completing therapy exercises? Keisha approached their table with professional composure, but Richard caught the slight tremor in her hands as she refilled their water glasses. "I hope that was all right, sir." Marcus asked about the music, and I just thought it was perfect, Richard interrupted, studying her face. There was something in her eyes, a depth of understanding that spoke of personal experience with struggle. "How did you know exactly what he needed?" Before Keisha could answer, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and Richard saw her face pale, her professional mask slipping for just a moment to reveal raw panic. "I'm sorry, Could someone else?" She was backing away from the table, her breathing shallow. "What's wrong?" The question escaped Richard before he could stop it. Keisha looked at Marcus, then at Richard, clearly wrestling with whether to speak. "It's my daughter. She's at Children's Hospital. They said if I can't make the payment tonight for her surgery deposit." She stopped abruptly, realizing she was sharing too much with a customer. Richard's business instincts kicked in, but this time they weren't calculating profit margins. They were recognizing opportunity for something far more valuable. "What kind of surgery?" "She has the same condition as Marcus," Keisha whispered, tears threatening to spill. "Cerebral palsy. The surgery could help her walk, but the insurance won't cover it all. And I don't have the $40,000 for the deposit." Marcus reached out and grabbed Keisha's hand with his own shaking one. "She danced with me, Daddy. She made me feel normal." Richard Henderson had made $10,000 decisions over lunch and million-dollar acquisitions over dinner. But standing in that restaurant, watching his son hold the hand of a woman who had given him something Richard never could. Acceptance. He was about to make the most important decision of his life. But first, he needed to know more about Keisha Williams. Within 6 hours, Richard's private investigator had compiled a comprehensive file on Keisha Williams. Sitting in his penthouse office at midnight, Richard spread the documents across his mahogany desk, each page revealing layers of a story that made his chest tighten with recognition and shame. Keisha Williams, 28 years old, single mother to 7-year-old Amara Williams. Worked 3 jobs: morning shift at Henderson's restaurant, afternoon house cleaning, evening catering gigs. No criminal record, graduated valedictorian from her high school despite teenage pregnancy. Never married Amara's father, who had disappeared when the diagnosis came in. The medical records made Richard's hands shake. Amara's condition was severe. Without the surgery, she would likely never walk independently. Keisha had been saving for 3 years, working 80-hour weeks, and was still $37,000 short of the required deposit. But it was the photograph that stopped Richard's heart entirely. Tucked between bank statements and employment records was a picture from Amara's school, showing a science fair display titled My Hero. The poster featured a drawing of a woman in a restaurant uniform, surrounded by crayon-drawn hearts. The caption, written in a child's careful handwriting, read, "My mommy works so hard so I can get better. She never gives up on me." Richard's phone rang. His assistant's voice was crisp despite the late hour. "Sir, I have the information you requested about Miss Williams' daughter's surgical team. Dr. Patterson says the window for optimal results is closing. They need to operate within the next 2 weeks. And the total cost? $147,000 for the complete procedure and rehabilitation." Richard closed the file and walked to his floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the city lights. 40 stories below, people lived lives he had never bothered to understand, working multiple jobs, sacrificing sleep, choosing between rent and medicine. His own son had been given every advantage, every therapy, every specialist money could buy. Yet in 5 minutes with Keisha Williams, Marcus had experienced something Richard's wealth had never purchased: pure, uncomplicated joy. The decision should have been simple. Write a check, solve the problem, feel good about his generosity. But something nagged at Richard, a suspicion that this was bigger than one family's medical bills. He picked up his phone and dialed his investigator. "I need you to dig deeper into Keisha Williams. Something doesn't add up." "What specifically are you looking for, Mr. Henderson?" Richard hesitated, not sure how to articulate the instinct that was keeping him awake. "I don't know yet, but I think there's more to this story." The call came at 6 a.m., jerking Richard from restless sleep. His investigator's voice was tense with discovery. "Mr. Henderson, you need to see this immediately. I'm emailing you a document now." Richard stumbled to his computer, his coffee growing cold as he opened the attachment. It was a legal document from 12 years ago, a liability settlement from Henderson Technologies manufacturing plant. "Sir, are you seeing the name on the workers' compensation claim?" Richard's blood turned to ice. "Williams, Jerome, Keisha's husband, father of her child, sir. He was the plant supervisor who reported the safety violations that your company ignored. The same violations that led to the explosion that killed 3 workers and put Jerome Williams in a coma for 8 months before he died." The room spun around Richard as memories crashed back. The plant explosion, the cover-up, the settlement that had made the families sign non-disclosure agreements in exchange for insurance payments that barely covered funeral costs. "Keep reading, sir." Richard's hands trembled as he scrolled down. Jerome Williams had been pregnant with Amara when the explosion happened. The trauma and stress had caused premature labor. The baby's cerebral palsy wasn't genetic. It was the direct result of the industrial accident that Richard's company had caused through negligence and covered up through legal intimidation. "There's more, sir. Keisha Williams never received her settlement money. The legal team classified Jerome as a whistleblower rather than a victim, which voided the compensation clause. She's been working 3 jobs for 7 years, not knowing that your company legally owes her family $2.3 million. Richard's phone clattered to the floor. He thought of Marcus's joy as he danced with Keisha. He thought of Amara, struggling with the same condition as his son, but without the resources to fight it. He thought of Keisha's gentle hands adjusting Marcus's napkin, her kindness toward the child of the man who had destroyed her family. The intercom buzzed. His assistant's voice was carefully neutral. "Sir, there's a Ms. Williams here to see you. She says it's about last night." Richard's heart hammered against his ribs. Did she know? Had she always known who he was when she danced with Marcus? Send her out. As he waited for the elevator to bring Keisha Williams to his office, Richard Henderson realized he was about to face the most important conversation of his life. Everything he thought he knew about justice, redemption, and the true cost of his success was about to be challenged by a woman who had every reason to hate him, but who had shown his son nothing but love. Keisha Williams entered Richard's office wearing the same black uniform from the night before. Her shoulders squared with determination despite the exhaustion lining her face. She had clearly been up all night, and Richard could see the hospital bracelet still wrapped around her wrist. "Mr. Henderson, I need to speak with you about last night," she began, her voice steady despite the obvious strain. "I shouldn't have brought my personal problems into your dinner. It was unprofessional, and I understand if you want to file a complaint with my manager." Richard gestured to the chair across from his desk, his throat dry. "Please, sit down. We need to talk about more than last night." As Keisha settled into the leather chair, Richard studied her face, searching for any sign that she recognized him as more than just another wealthy customer. Her expression remained politely professional, but he caught her glancing at the framed photo on his desk. Marcus at his 10th birthday party, smiling stiffly in his wheelchair. "Your son is beautiful," she said softly, "and he's lucky to have a father who takes him to nice restaurants, who gives him experiences. Not every child with his condition gets that." The words hit Richard like physical blows. "What do you mean?" "I mean that disability is expensive, Mr. Henderson. The therapies, the equipment, the surgeries, they're luxuries that most of us can't afford. I've been watching your son during your visits to the restaurant, and I can tell he has everything he needs. That's wonderful." Richard's hands clenched on his desk. She was praising him for giving Marcus advantages that should have been available to every child, including her own daughter. "Tell me about Amara." Keisha's composure cracked slightly. "She's 7, born premature after her father died in an industrial accident. The doctors say the surgery could help her walk independently, maybe even run someday. But the hospital needs a deposit tonight. And even working 3 jobs," she stopped, looking down at her hands. "I'm sorry. You didn't ask to hear about my problems." "What if I told you that I could help?" Richard asked carefully. "I would say that's very kind, but I don't accept charity. I work for what my daughter needs." "What if it wasn't charity? What if it was something owed?" Keisha looked up sharply, and for the first time, Richard saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. Not recognition of his face, but recognition of something deeper. The tone of a man carrying unbearable guilt. "I don't understand what you mean." Richard opened his desk drawer and pulled out the file his investigator had compiled. His hands shook as he slid it across the desk to her. "I think you should know the truth about your husband's death." Keisha's face went white as she opened the folder and saw Jerome's name on the first document. "How do you have this?" "These records were sealed because my company sealed them," Richard whispered. "Jerome Williams worked for Henderson Technologies. He died trying to protect his coworkers from safety violations that I chose to ignore because fixing them would have cost too much." The silence that followed was deafening. Keisha stared at the documents, her breathing shallow, as the full weight of Richard's confessions settled between them. When she finally looked up, her eyes held a fury that made Richard shrink back in his chair. But what she said next shocked him to his core. "I know who you are." The words hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Richard's world tilted as Keisha's mask of professional politeness finally fell away, revealing not just anger, but something far more complex. A pain so deep it had calcified into quiet strength. "You've known all along?" Richard's voice was barely a whisper. "I've known for 3 years, since the day I started working at your restaurant." Keisha's hands were steady now, her voice gaining power. "I needed a job with health insurance, and Henderson Industries offers the best benefits in the city. Ironic, isn't it? The company that killed my husband also became my only hope of saving my daughter." Richard felt like he was drowning. "Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you—" "What? Sue you? Take you to court? With what money? Against what lawyers?" Keisha laughed bitterly. "You think I didn't try? Your legal team buried the case so deep that most attorneys wouldn't even return my calls. But last night, with Marcus, you were so kind to him. Keisha's expression softened slightly. That little boy didn't kill my husband. That little boy deserves to feel joy, to feel normal, to have someone see him as more than his disability. My anger at you doesn't extend to an innocent child. Richard stared at this woman who had shown his son more grace in 5 minutes than he himself had managed in 12 years. What do you want from me? I want you to look at this. Keisha pulled out her phone and showed him a video. It was Amara, struggling to take a few steps with metal braces on her legs, falling, getting up, trying again. She does this every day, 4 hours of exercises, trying to build strength for a surgery we can't afford. She never complains. She never asks why other kids can run and she can't. The video continued, showing Amara drawing at a small table, her tongue poking out in concentration. She draws pictures of herself dancing, Mr. Henderson, dancing with her daddy, who she doesn't remember but who I tell her stories about every night. Richard's chest was tight with anguish. I'll pay for the surgery. I'll pay for everything. The rehabilitation, the equipment, whatever she needs. And then what? Keisha's eyes blazed. You write a check and feel better about yourself? You go back to your penthouse and your board meetings and tell yourself you're a good person now? What else can I do? I can't bring Jerome back. No, you can't. But you can do something else. Keisha leaned forward, her intensity filling the room. You can make sure this never happens to another family. Richard felt the weight of her words, but before he could respond, Keisha's phone rang. She glanced at it, and her face went ashen. It's the hospital, she whispered, then answered with a trembling voice. Hello? Yes, this is Amara Williams' mother. Richard watched her face crumble as she listened to whatever news was being delivered on the other end of the line. We're losing her, Keisha whispered, her phone clattering to the floor. Amara's having complications. They need to operate immediately, but without the deposit, her voice broke entirely. Richard was already reaching for his phone, dialing numbers with practiced efficiency. Dr. Patterson? This is Richard Henderson. You have a patient, Amara Williams. Whatever she needs, authorize it now. Send all bills to me personally. Sir, hospital policy requires. I don't care about policy. That little girl goes into surgery now or I will buy your hospital and make sure you never practice medicine again. The threat came out with the full force of a man who had built an empire on such ultimatums. But for the first time, Richard was using his power for something that mattered. Keisha stared at him in shock. As he continued making calls to his lawyers, his accountants, his board of directors, within 10 minutes, he had authorized the immediate transfer of $200,000 to Children's Hospital and put his entire legal team on notice. Why are you doing this? Keisha asked as they rushed toward the elevator. Because 12 years ago, I chose profits over people. Because your husband died trying to do the right thing while I was in a boardroom deciding it was too expensive to care. Because my son smiled more in 5 minutes with you than he has in 5 years with me. They rode to the hospital in Richard's limousine, the silence heavy with years of grief and guilt. Richard watched Keisha pray quietly, her lips moving without sound, and realized he was witnessing something he had never experienced. Faith without guarantees, hope without safety nets. At the hospital, they waited. Richard called Marcus's school, then his nanny, then sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair that cost less than his daily coffee and felt more important than his leather office throne. Hours passed. Keisha dozed fitfully against his shoulder. Richard Henderson, who controlled billions in assets, felt more powerless than ever before. When Dr. Patterson finally emerged, his smile said everything. The surgery was successful. Amara will need months of rehabilitation, but she should be able to walk independently within a year. Keisha collapsed into Richard's arms, sobbing with relief and exhaustion. Over her shoulder, Richard saw Marcus rolling toward them in his wheelchair, having been brought by his nanny. Daddy, is Keisha's little girl going to be okay? Yes, son, she's going to be okay. Marcus reached out and took Keisha's hand, just as he had in the restaurant. We can all dance together now. Richard looked at his son, at this remarkable woman who had forgiven the unforgivable, at the hospital corridors filled with families fighting battles he had never bothered to understand. 6 months later, the Henderson Foundation had funded safety improvements at manufacturing plants across the country. Richard had testified before Congress about corporate responsibility. Keisha Williams was the foundation's director of family services, with a salary that would ensure Amara never wanted for anything. But the real transformation happened every Tuesday evening, when Richard would pick up Marcus and drive to Keisha's apartment. There, in a living room that cost less than his office carpet, he would watch his son play with Amara, both children in their wheelchairs, both learning to navigate the world with dignity and joy. Sometimes they would dance, Marcus leading as Keisha had taught him, Amara following with the grace of someone who had learned that every step was a victory. And Richard Henderson, billionaire, would sit on a second-hand couch, learning that the most valuable currency in the world wasn't money, it was the choice to see others as fully human, fully deserving of hope. The dance that had changed everything continued, one small step at a time.